Before we begin, this episode of Revenge and Madness contains discussions of political violence, attempted murder, family trauma, war, execution, grief, and the death of loved ones. Listener discretion is advised. The room is silent, except for the cracking of a fire. A young boy lies unconscious in bed, his body broken from a fall that should have killed him. Days have passed, yet he has not awakened. Servants come and go. Maesters offer what little comfort they can. Friends and family try to speak words of hope, but hope is becoming harder to find. Beside the bed sits a mother who has barely moved. She no longer cares for the politics. She no longer cares about noble houses or the games powerful men play. The world beyond these walls has stopped existing. There is only this room, this bed, this child, and the terrifying uncertainty of whether he will ever open his eyes again. Then, in the darkness, a stranger arrives. A dagger flashes in the firelight. The assassin moves towards the helpless boy, and suddenly, a mother who has spent days drowning in fear is forced to fight. Not for a kingdom, not for honor, not for power, for her son. When the struggle ends, blood stains the floor, and questions remain unanswered. Who sent the assassin? Why was Bran Stark targeted? And perhaps most importantly, how far is a mother willing to go when she believes someone is trying to murder her child? For Catelyn Stark, the answer would change the fate of Westeros. Because long before the Red Wedding, long before the vengeance, long before the woman known as Lady Stoneheart, there was simply a mother trying to protect her family. And that may have been the beginning of everything. There are some people in history and fiction who are remembered for the wars they fought. Others are remembered for the kingdoms they ruled, the enemies they defeated, or the legends they became after their death. But Catelyn Stark is remembered for something far more human. She is remembered for loving her family. In a world where ambition often triumphs over decency and power is purchased through betrayal, Catelyn Stark spent most of her life believing in something surprisingly simple. She believed that family mattered, that loyalty meant something, that duty carried responsibility, and that the people we love are worth any sacrifice required to protect them. Those beliefs made her admirable, though they also made her vulnerable. Because Westeros is not a world that rewards compassion, it is a world that exploits it. Throughout the story of House Stark, countless people are destroyed by greed, pride, prophecy, and the pursuit of power. Catelyn was different. She never wanted a throne. She never sought glory. She never dreamed of conquest or legacy. She wanted her husband safe. She wanted her children protected. She wanted her family to survive. And yet, despite all of her efforts, she would watch nearly everything she loved slip through her fingers. Today, we're exploring the story of Catelyn Stark before the war consumed Westeros, before the betrayals, before the grief, before the woman that known as Lady Stoneheart emerged from death itself. Because before she became a symbol of loss and vengeance, Catelyn Stark was the heart of Winterfell. And understanding who she was before the tragedy is the only way to understand what tragedy eventually turned her into. Long before the kings marched to war and banners flew across battlefields, there was Winterfell, a fortress of stone standing against the northern cold, a family gathered in its hearth. At the center of it all stood a woman who believed that love, loyalty, and duty could hold a household together no matter how harsh the world became. This is the story of the Lady of Winterfell. Long before she became one of the more tragic figures in Westeros, Catelyn Stark was simply Catelyn Tully. Born at Riverrun, she was raised beneath the words of House Tully, family, duty, honor. Those three values would shape nearly every major decision she made throughout her life. While many noble children learned to view politics as a game and power as a prize, Catelyn was taught something different. She learned that responsibility mattered, that loyalty carried weight, that protecting the people entrusted to you was more important than personal ambition. Those lessons would become both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. Originally, Catelyn was betrothed to Brandon Stark, the eldest brother of Eddard Stark. But when Brandon was murdered during the madness of King Aerys II, the future she expected vanished overnight. Instead, she found herself married to Brandon's younger brother Ned, a man she barely knew. What began as a marriage of necessity slowly became something rare within Westeros, a genuine partnership. Over the years, Ned and Catelyn built a family together that felt remarkably normal by the standards of the Seven Kingdoms. They raised Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon within the walls of Winterfell. There was discipline, certainty, but there was also warmth. Laughter echoed through the halls. The Stark children grew up surrounded by parents who genuinely loved them. And for a time, Winterfell almost felt untouched by the cruelty that defines so much of the world beyond its walls. Of course, not everything was perfect. One shadow lingered over the house from the very beginning: Jon Snow. Ned's bastard son represented something Catelyn could never fully reconcile. Every time she looked at Jon, she was reminded of what she believed had been her husband's betrayal. Whether Ned had loved another woman or simply found comfort during war, the result was the same. Jon's existence stood as a permanent reminder of a wound that never truly healed. Over the years, that resentment hardened into emotional distance. It remained one of the most controversial aspects of Catelyn's character because it reveals a difficult truth. She was neither a saint nor a villain. She was human, capable of immense compassion towards the people she loved, and equally capable of holding on to pain longer than she should have. Yet despite her flaws, Catelyn remains the emotional center of the Stark family. When decisions need to be made, she provided her perspective. When the household was faced with uncertainty, she provides stability. She was not the warrior of the family. She was not the strategist. She was not the ruler. She was the person who held everything together. And perhaps that is why the tragedy that followed would hit so much harder. Because when the foundation of a family begins to crack, it is often the person holding everything together who feels the strain first. For years, Winterfell felt safe. Not perfect, not free from hardship, but safe. Then one boy climbed a tower, and in a single moment, everything changed. Because the fall that nearly killed Bran Stark would become the first domino in a chain of events that would eventually drag House Stark, House Lannister, and the entire realm into war. And for Catelyn Stark, fear would begin making decisions where reason once had. The moment Bran Stark fell from the tower, the world of Catelyn Stark had spent years building begins to fracture. At first, there is only uncertainty. Bran survives the fall, but barely. His body is broken. His mind is trapped somewhere beyond the reach. Days pass without improvement. Winterfell continues functioning around her, but for Catelyn, the world shrinks to a single room and a single purpose. She refuses to leave her son's bedside. Sleep becomes rare. Food becomes an afterthought. Every waking moment is spent watching and waiting for signs that Bran might return to her. He never does. Not yet. Then comes an assassin. In the dead of night, a stranger enters Bran's chamber carrying a Valyrian steel dagger. His orders are simple: finish what the fall could not. What follows is not a political confrontation or a noble dispute. It is a mother fighting for her child. With the help of Bran's direwolf Summer, the assassin is killed. But the damage is already done. Someone wanted Bran dead. Someone believed it was important enough to send a murderer into Winterfell itself. For Catelyn, Fear immediately becomes certainty. This was no accident. Someone is targeting her family. The mysterious dagger only deepens the suspicion. When Peter Baelish later claims that the blade once belonged to Tyrion Lannister, Catelyn believes she finally has an answer. Whether driven by grief, anger, or desperation, she embraces the explanation because it gives shape to her fear. If the Lannisters are responsible, then justice can still be found. But fear rarely leads people towards wisdom. It leads them to action. And action, especially when fueled by emotion, often carries consequences no one can predict. While traveling south, Catelyn unexpectedly encounters Tyrion at an inn. Presented with what she believes is a chance to bring a would-be murderer to justice, she acts immediately. Calling upon the loyalty of the Northern Bannermen and the Riverland allies, she has Tyrion seized and taken prisoner. From her perspective, the decision is understandable. A mother believes someone is trying to murder her son. She believes she has found the man responsible. She acts. But politics rarely care about intentions. By arresting Tyrion Lannister, Catelyn unintentionally ignites a conflict between two of the most powerful families in Westeros. The fragile peace holding the realm together begins to splinter. Retaliation follows. Alliances harden. Old rivalries reawaken. What begins as a mother's attempt to protect her child slowly transforms into something much more larger, the first sparks of war. And although Catelyn cannot yet see the devastation waiting on the horizon, the path towards tragedy has already begun. Every war has a moment when peace can still be saved, a moment when people can step back from the edge and choose a different path. For House Stark, that moment dies in King's Landing, because while Catelyn searches for answers, Robb prepares to defend the North, and Eddard Stark finds himself trapped in a city where honor has become a liability, and when the capital turns against him, the fate of House Stark changes forever. If Bran's fall is the first crack in the foundation, Eddard Stark's execution is the moment the entire structure collapses. When Robert Baratheon dies, the political tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupts into open conflict. Ned Stark attempts to do what he has always done throughout his life, tell the truth, and act honorably. In another world, that might have been enough. In King's Landing, it becomes a death sentence. Surrounded by rivals who view power as something to be seized rather than earned, Ned discovers that integrity offers little protection against people willing to lie, manipulate, and betray. Despite uncovering the truth about Joffrey's parentage, despite trying to avoid another unnecessary bloodshed, he finds himself imprisoned and branded a traitor. Back in the North, Catelyn can do little except wait and hope. But hope is becoming increasingly fragile. When news finally arrives, it is worse than anyone imagined. Before a crowd gathered in the capital, Eddard Stark is executed on the orders of King Joffrey Baratheon. The man who serves as the moral center for House Stark is gone. A husband, a father, a lord, a good man, gone. For Catelyn, the loss is immeasurable. Everything she built alongside Ned suddenly feels uncertain. The future she imagined for her family vanishes in a single swing of the sword. Yet the grief is quickly overtaken by necessity. The North demands action. The banners rise. And Robb Stark, still barely more than a boy, finds himself thrust into a role he was never meant to inherit so soon. The king in the North. The declaration electrifies the North and inspires thousands to follow him into battle. For many, it feels like justice, a chance to avenge Ned Stark and reclaim Northern independence. But for Catelyn, the moment is far more complicated. She sees the pride in her son's eyes. She sees the loyalty of the men surrounding him. And she sees something else. The cost. Because while others celebrate a king's rise, Catelyn understands what a crown truly demands. War, blood, sacrifice, and mothers burying sons. The War of the Five Kings has begun, and although nobody knows it yet, the losses that lie ahead will make Ned Stark's death feel like only the beginning. As the North marched to war behind their young king, the realm continued to fall apart. Kings declare themselves rulers, armies cross borders, ancient alliances shattered beneath ambition and vengeance. For many, the coming conflict promised glory. For Catelyn Stark, it promised something else. More opportunities to lose people she loved, and unfortunately, she was right. The tragedy of Catelyn Stark is not that she failed to see danger. It's that she often saw it long before anyone else did. As the War of the Five Kings spread across the Westeros, Catelyn became one of few people surrounding Robb Stark who truly understood the cost of what lies ahead. While the banners wave and victories are celebrated, she sees the reality hidden beneath them. Every battle meant dead sons. Every triumph meant another family receiving terrible news. Every mile gained on a map comes at the price paid in blood. Unlike many of the lords surrounding her, Catelyn never romanticizes war. She understands that war is simply grief waiting to happen. Throughout Robb's campaign, she serves as both advisor and conscience. Again and again, she urges caution where others demand vengeance. She pushes for diplomacy where others seek glory. She understands that winning battles and winning peace are two very different things. But the war continues moving beyond anyone's control. One of the clearest examples comes during her meeting with Renly Baratheon. Renly's camp is filled with color, celebration, tournaments, and confidence. Thousands rally beneath his banners when the realm burns around them. To many, Renly represents hope. To Catelyn, it feels like denial. Then, in an instant, everything changes. Renly is murdered by a shadow born from dark magic. Catelyn witnesses the impossible with her own eyes. Suddenly, this conflict is no longer simply about kings and armies. Ancient powers are stirring. The old ruler no longer seem reliable. The old rules seem no longer reliable. The realm itself feels as though it is unraveling. And yet, even that is not the greatest challenge she faces, because the war outside is nothing compared to the war raging inside her. Every message brings fresh pain. Arya is missing. Sansa remains trapped in King's Landing. The North continues bleeding soldiers. And then, perhaps the cruelest blow of all, news arrives that Bran and Rickon Stark are dead. The boys she fought so desperately to protect are believed murdered. For Catelyn, something begins to break. The grief she has carried since Ned's death becomes something heavier, more desperate, more dangerous. She is no longer thinking like a political advisor. She is thinking like a mother drowning in loss. And the desperation ultimately leads to a decision that will define much of her legacy. Jaime Lannister. As Robb's most valuable prisoner, Jaime represents leverage. He represents bargaining power. He represents one of the North's greatest advantages in the war. But Catelyn no longer sees him a prisoner. She sees a possibility, a chance to bring her daughters home. Believing she may have already lost Bran, Rickon, and Ned, she secretly arranges Jaime's release in hoping of exchanging him for Sansa and Arya. Strategically, it's a disaster. Emotionally, it is heartbreaking. Because by this point, Catelyn Stark is no longer trying to win a war. She is trying to save whatever remains of her family. And perhaps that is the most important thing to understand about her character. Many people throughout Westeros chase power. Catelyn chases love. Again and again, she risks everything for them. And again, the world punishes her for it. Yet, even as alliances begin fracturing, mistakes begin piling up, Catelyn can already sense something terrible approaching. Walder Frey has been insulted. The northern cause is weakening. The victories are becoming harder to celebrate. And somewhere ahead, waiting in the darkness, a final betrayal is preparing to strike. The storm has not yet arrived. But Catelyn Stark can already hear the thunder. Catelyn Stark is one of the most human characters George R.R. Martin has ever created. She is not the greatest warrior in Westeros. She is not the cleverest politician. She is not a conqueror, a prophet, or a legendary hero. She is a wife, a mother, a woman who spent nearly every moment of her story trying to protect the people she loves. And that exactly is why her tragedy hurts so much. Many characters in Westeros are destroyed by their ambition. Catelyn is destroyed by her devotion. Her greatest strength and her greatest weakness are ultimately the same thing: her family. Every choice she makes can be traced back to love: capturing Tyrion, advising Robb, freeing Jaime. Even her mistakes are born from a desire to save those she cannot bear to lose. The tragedy is that Westeros does not reward people for loving deeply. It punishes them, again and again, until there is nothing left. Or at least, that's how this story appears to end. Because while this chapter of Catelyn Stark's life closes with war spreading across the Seven Kingdoms, and House Stark standing on an increasingly unstable ground, the worst is still yet to come. The betrayals, the loss, the grief, and the night that would change Westeros forever. For now, we've explored the woman behind the legend, the Lady of Winterfell, the daughter of House Tully, the wife of Eddard Stark, the mother who spent her life trying to hold her family together while the world around them slowly fell apart. But every tragedy has a breaking point, and in the next chapter of Catelyn Stark's story, that breaking point finally arrives. The War of the Five Kings rages across Westeros. Robb Stark marches beneath the banner of the direwolf. Alliances begin to fracture. Hope becomes increasingly difficult to find. And waiting at the end of the road sits a castle called the Twins. A wedding, a song, and one of the most infamous betrayals in fantasy history. Because next time, we continue the story of Catelyn Stark as we follow her through the final days of the war and toward the event that would shatter House Stark forever: the Red Wedding. If you liked this episode of Revenge and Madness, check out my other shows. The links are all in the description below. I'd also really appreciate it if you checked out some of our other shows from our little podcast group like Fandoms and Hey Anime, and let them know I sent you. Until next time, sometimes the people who suffer the most are not the warriors who fight the battles. They're the ones that waiting at home, praying the people they love come back alive.